Hello everyone. It's been quite some time since I last did a video. I just want to quickly update you. I had surgery back in February and that didn't go awfully well. They went into my temporal artery here and there were complications. So I was left with some damage to my motor nerves, and because there's an awful lot of nerves in that area, controlling not just the face, but, all the way down the right side of your body. It was a bit scary, but I was lucky in that there was only the upper right of my face affected. But for some time I looked a bit lopsided, like someone who's had a stroke. If you think it still looks a wee bit odd, I can't quite control my right eye yet, but it is already just a little bit better. Enough for me to want to trial and see if I can do a video. So thank you for bearing with me in that little experiment. After all, I tell myself, you don't come here to look at my beautiful face. You come here because you want to see games and we want to talk about games. So let's do that, because I am finally now in a position that I can actually do some gaming again, a little bit of video editing, so it's not much, but I hope there's something here you find interesting nonetheless. You all know what a big fan of the Persona games I am, and I think pretty much everybody would agree that they nowadays set the standard for a really top-notch JRPG. I was a bit surprised when I recently came across a new game called Mato Anomalies. It's a day one edition. It comes in a box, the game and a small art book, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. The reason why I want to talk about this game before showing you a bit of footage I recorded yesterday is that it was made by a not yet terribly well-known developer studio. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. The studio is called Arrowwiz, and they are based in Shanghai. Now, you may not yet have heard of or come across this particular game. It was released not so long ago. So the game has a very strong cyberpunk theme and aesthetic. Interestingly, it doesn't go overboard on the whole neon thing, which I'm actually not too fond of. So when we look at the art, you'll see what I mean. But it has a bit of a noir vibe to it. So the story is set in a futuristic city called Mato, which, as far as I can tell, looks like it might be a sort of fantasy Neo-Shanghai, possibly. In the story, we have a private detective who will need to investigate. Now, this character does the investigating, but he doesn't do any fighting. That is left to other characters.
The city faces endless problems, but we have the ability to solve them, so why not try?
The game alternates between the dungeon exploration and the investigation. So our private detective Doe investigates the emergence of spatial anomalies, and that's where the anomalies and the title comes from. They're kind of rifts appearing. They lead to a different dimension where loads of demons are about. They're not called demons as such in the game. They're referred to by the name Bane Tide. Now, one of the interesting mechanics the developers integrated into the game is so-called mind hacks, which you have to do via a kind of card-based battle system. It reminds me just a little bit of Soul Hackers, if you are familiar with that game. We recently had Soul Hackers 2, then you will have an idea what I'm thinking of. So once again, that sounds appealing to me. I'm just slightly worried in case the developers literally tried to stuff too many features into the game and not doing any of them well enough, That's something to watch out for. So here we have our main character, the private detective Doe, and this is the very important character Graham, who is introduced very, very early on in the game, so that's why I'm showing you this. There's no real spoiler there. There's also an android in the game. Overall, there's a very dark theme to the game, which is reflected here in these images. A lot of the action centers around the building for the company Telosma. You're introduced to that straight away in the beginning. So what I would like to do is a Neo-Noir Shanghai investigation. The one problem with a small budget is that those studios tend to not have the money to afford voice actors. That is the case here, and it's always a real shame because the voices just bring everything to life. So there's a fair amount of text in the game, and without the voice acting, if the text were to read terrible, that would virtually ruin the whole game. So let's have a look at Mato Anomalies. Here there is no past or future. A place that operates solely on unverifiable rumours, where irrational cultures blend around and among the bizarre chatter of the residents. This broken mirror, this shattered dimension, this jigsaw puzzle of reality. I appreciate your determination. Enter the protagonist, a would-be detective who opens the door to fate. And here we are introduced to the cutscene style of Mato. Yes, it's in comic strip format. And here I spotted a small blemish. They forgot to voice one of the speech bubbles.
But the contract is still active, Mr. Doe.
Here we have our first conversation between Detective Doe and the information broker called Nightshade. Now, those two have a little bit of back history, so the dialogue really should be crackling and be giving us some insights. But on the whole, I found most of the dialogue to be more on the trivial side, and for characterization they really mainly confirm stereotypes. The dialogue is not bad as such, but for a game that relies really heavily on text-based dialogue, I had expected better. The game has an easy-to-read and understand interface, and the two exclamation marks clearly show us our next mission point. I'm just having a look around the environment. It doesn't look too bad graphically, but there is a curious, lifeless quality to the NPCs in particular. Now here we have to pick the right answer according to the clue we were given by Nightshade. Not exactly difficult if you paid attention. In my few hours of gameplay so far, I have not encountered any more taxing choices to make. In fact, the game appears to be heavily scripted, and any choices you are able to make tend to be of the trivial type. This contributes to the sense that you are not truly doing actual detective work yourself, and you're not actually establishing relationships with the other characters. The game is leading you towards the predetermined choices. Whether there's any change in that later down the track, I can't say yet, but so far the schemata for the game are very clearly laid out, and I would expect it to stay within those parameters. I'm a big fan of having interesting NPCs in RPGs, and this is certainly one area where this game falls very flat. Most of the NPCs you can't talk to at all, and those that do speak often have nothing terribly interesting to say, or it's so cryptic it doesn't make any sense yet.
Sounds fishy.
During Doe's first investigation, something strange happens. Here's one of these cutscenes, which I think are a strong point in Mato Anomalies. So it looks like Doe has fallen into one of these rifts, and we're being introduced to this other world. It's all pretty basic, straightforward stuff. In a moment, he will encounter the very first enemy for tutorial purposes. Here is some enemy design, which I don't find particularly inspired. Doe meets Graham here. Graham basically rescues him, and in the process they find some of that mysterious handout stuff. Back at Graham's place, there is some more inconsequential dialogue about the difference between sniffing, snooping and meandering, but we do get to meet the android, and that's of course very cool. So let me show you now a bit of the dungeons and combat, not a tutorial one, that's really too boring, just a bit further on. Before we dive into a dungeon, though, let me just show you one entry from the very extensive guidebook, which is designed to give you really good background understanding of how the world works and the lore. A lot of that does not really come up in the game itself, so I read practically all the entries. I found this one really taxing. For describing the beginnings of the world, it really lacks quite a bit of impact. There are portentous statements, some of which don't actually make a lot of sense, like the variables of fate are precisely the testimony that the world is still operating. What does that actually mean? The next sentence, only change is the eternal and unchanging truth, does actually make sense, but is not really overwhelming in insight. And the last sentence is simply grammatically mangled. But despair is joined by a friend because of this hope. Nope.
God knows why they want to get involved with humans.
There is no common sense as far as they're concerned. Why try to solve a problem when you can eliminate it?
Right at the beginning of the aptly named Gluttony Mountain, we are being introduced to one of the big themes of the game, and that is greed and capitalism. It's pretty straightforward. You've only got a few skills, and there's not much you can do for defending at all. So you see the bladeless blade, the one that attacks several targets, has a timer, it's a cooldown period. It's all pretty standard JRPG stuff. There are no big surprises here in the combat.
I'll take care of this. Just as I thought.
I mean, the design is not bad. It looks quite good, I think. Like many other JRPGs, it uses a weakness to certain attack types system that makes it easy. Just like in Soul Hackers 2, the enemies are always clearly labelled, so you almost cannot go wrong with your chosen attack. Like most other RPGs, you can unlock some extra skills called talents, and it's a pretty straightforward system, easy to manage. I do love it when you finally discover a save point. I'm playing on the default normal difficulty, and I would call that practically easy. So if you want just a bit more of a challenge, you would need to go up to a harder setting. The first boss turns out to pose not much of a challenge. Transformation. She turns out to be someone.
Sneak attack, huh? Not today.
Easy. I just saved you. The layer is full of unknown threats. You were nearly swallowed whole by the Bane Tide.
Nonsense. Just tell me if Rich is really dead or not.
Good news and bad news. Which do you want first?
Hit me with the bad.
He's living pretty well.
So what's the good news then?
I'll kill him.
Oh, no, you didn't. That's my job.
Don't get in my way.
You think I'm a child or something? Crawl out of your grave and listen good. I'm the famous butterfly.
And?
Are you for real? The butterfly fairy?
You were like a chicken with its head cut off.
Who becomes a new ally. Now, this was the first and only piece of dialogue I've had so far that had a real sparkle to it, and I think it's the character of the butterfly. She is kind of cute and sassy, and she livens up the whole thing. I wish the game were much more like that. It's always important to me that the map is good and easily accessible. Finally, there's also a simple system of gears for your equipment. Again, very straightforward. And I hadn't mentioned yet that the dungeons pose some very simple puzzles. This was my first mind hack, and I'm basically getting to know the cards and how to operate the system. On top of the informant we need to hack, there are also 2 demon entities that can interfere in the process, so it's a good idea, according to the tutorial, to eliminate them. You see the subject of the mind hack writhing here in some discomfort, actually not pleasant, and now it's his turn to take action. He added 6 attack power, and now it's my turn with the cards, and I pick a defense with bonus. You can keep 1 card for the next turn. I inspect my new cards and opt to go with persuasion with extra power and defense, because I want to keep the stronger persuasion card to interrogate the subject. That's what I do now, using up 2 out of my 3 points. He adds 3 defense, and I get my new set of cards using the only persuasion one I have on the subject clairvoyant. It's sort of rinse and repeat with him adding more defense and me using a persuasion card again, plus a persuasion card specifically against demons. He's getting desperate now, using 10 power attack. I decide with my new turn to go for more persuasion directly against the subject. You can see how sticky the movement with the analog stick is. But look, I managed to whittle him down, mind hacked. I don't know about you, but I found these 6 turns not terribly interesting. I just didn't feel that involved. I'm not sure whether it was the visual presentation, which didn't make me feel like I was really interrogating someone, and the card action, not always very precisely and clearly described. I play a lot of card games like Slay the Spire, Rogue Book. This feels a bit of a by-the-numbers design. So did we extract any valuable information? Apparently not, because we now have to use something called perception sharing. So Doe is the guinea pig, and it's very unpleasant. This badge is consortium property. You there, and be quick about it. Where is that man in charge? He's sending them. Don't know any pay, but... What? You didn't get anything out of all that? Consortium, the goods belong. She is astounded at this revelation, and I feel deflated. Just the kind of lead we needed. Good work. The combat gets just slightly more interesting with a second party member, but note one oddity: the shared HP between party members makes no real sense to me. By this stage, I have shown you most of the aspects the game has to offer, and I now would like to talk a bit about comparisons with other JRPGs, and in particular the Persona series. This game and others before it were often compared with the Persona JRPGs, and in particular in recent years with Persona 5. This game has fared no differently, and although the developers themselves have never, in any of their statements and material, pointed out that they were trying to build on the Persona 5 achievements and produce something similar, the media nonetheless do like throwing about the Persona-like or Persona clone label. Persona label slapped on it. That's it. Oh, it's a Persona clone. How often have we heard that now? Quite a few times. Is it really? Is that true? From what I have seen so far and what I have shown you, I would really struggle to place this game in any category that puts it close to a Persona game, and not just from the point of view of quality, which is clearly a lot lower in this case. No, it's almost like saying, because Persona 5 has dungeon crawling in it and some social relationships, therefore any game that features these aspects is a Persona-like. That's just, to me, errant nonsense. The vast majority of Japanese RPGs, or in general JRPGs, feature dungeon crawling of the type you see here. You also get in most JRPGs a lot of dialogue and interaction between characters, because that is what Japanese games do. It doesn't mean you end up with something like Persona 5. In the case of Mato Anomalies, I would say the game is much closer to a very linear, predetermined visual novel with a dungeon crawling element and a mini-game in the form of a card battle incorporated. Whereas in Persona games, every decision you are forced to take will lead you down a slightly different path. According to your decisions, your social links or confidant links will develop in a particular way, the way your studies at school go, or whether you earn after-school pocket money. All these things are determined by you. You have player agency. In simpler games like this one, this simply does not happen. I don't think enough people talk about the significance of the calendar system in Persona games. It looks like such a simple time system, but it is really incredibly ingenious because it forces time pressure onto the player the whole time. And if you have played Persona 4 Golden, you will know that this can drive you nuts at times. You are constantly pushed into making micro decisions about whether you talk to one person or another, etc. You'll know what I'm talking about. And Persona 5 is, of course, no different, although I feel it's possibly slightly more lenient. Once you take the time factor out of the equation, everything is different. All in all, my feelings about Mato Anomalies so far are that a focus on the visual novel story might have been better for the end product. I suspect this is why they introduced auto battle to an already pretty straightforward, easy to play combat system, so people could get through the dungeons quickly and focus on the story, the world, and the themes. Maybe keep the card system for mind hacking and put more work into that. A gripping visual novel coupled with an unusual card battle system to elicit secrets from people, to me, could have worked quite well, rather than introducing dungeons which are clearly trying to imitate the one aspect of Persona games in having themed dungeons and enemies. There is a lot more one could talk about with Mato Anomalies, especially regarding the lore for the world building. I'll leave it at that for today. Please let me know if there are any other issues or aspects of Mato Anomalies you would like me to go into. As always, I appreciate your ongoing support. Thank you very much. Please keep well. I'm Food for Dogs. Bye-bye.